Living inside everyone is an intrinsic yearning to be a warrior, yet few are born with a drive deep in their heart to be a warrior and live by it. Learn how to tap into that warrior way, life, and potential to unlock an ancient drive. Join Eric Carball, author, entrepreneur, and former U.S. Marine, on the Warrior Up Show each week with segments that will challenge your perspectives, encourage you, and showcases a warrior spotlight where he focuses on what made a warrior. Have you ever thought if you have a purpose or mission in this life? It's time to live on purpose and warrior up. Here's our host, Eric Carball.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of The Warrior Up Show. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel and watch The Warrior Up Show each week on remnantlife.tv that happens every Friday. Also, if for some reason we're not on your favorite podcast channel, please let us know so we can try our best to get it uploaded and added just as soon as we can. Now, each week we're going to take a walk through what a warrior is. It might not necessarily be devoted directly to the warrior, but it will be different traits and hopefully action items or tools that we can add in our toolbox every week. And that is the goal of the Warrior Up Show. Also, we hope to get some live interviews as well with different people, either that I know personally or even people that are interested in the show. So this is going to be a lot of fun once we get to that point as well. Today's episode, though, it's on what is a warrior and what is a warrior's creed, and are they the same thing? Can you have one without the other? And these a lot of times are questions that people ask. They might not understand necessarily the answers to those questions, and even myself, I get sometimes confused by them as well. It's pretty easy to do so if we're not careful. Now, you can do a quick online search and you can look for what is a warrior's creed. You're going to get probably 6, 7, 8, 9, a dozen or more different opportunities or options rather of what a warrior's creed is. I even have one in the book for Warrior Up as well. And the creed that I wrote there, it's my own personal creed that I really want to try to live by to be a better person, to warrior up each day. And the question is, what is a creed? And I know I started it off with what is a warrior, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. First, you have to understand what a creed is, because there are people that will have examples or exemplify traits or qualities of a warrior without actually being a warrior themselves. And this is going to be a little bit tricky to answer, but I will get to that in just a moment. So let's just talk about what the warrior creed is. Now, a basic example of what a creed pretty much is, it's a brief formula of religious belief. Sometimes it's even a set of fundamental beliefs or principles. But if you boil that all the way down to the key basic foundation of it, it's just a set of guiding principles. And that's really all a creed is. So you can have a creed for a rifleman's creed, you can have a creed for a business, or some people will call it a mantra, some people will call it their life mission statement, but more or less that's exactly what a creed is. A creed is exactly that. It's how people use that set of principles as the guide to get where they want to go. There is nothing different than that whatsoever. There's nothing complex about it at all. It's just simply that. It's a set of guiding principles. For many churches, the Bible is their creed for that, and that's why the initial conversation was a formula of religious belief, and that's really essentially what it is. It's just whatever you use as a guide to get you to where you want to go. Think of it as a roadmap. You can't get to point B from point A without a map or the directions, and that's what all of that a creed really is. It's just simply that. Just your way to get to where you need to be. Now, when we start talking about what a warrior is and how these different traits then become the creed, this is what I want to get into next. So a warrior in itself, we've all seen these romantic images, the Hollywood theatrical displays with movies, whether it's like Braveheart with basically the Scots going to battle against their opponents, and you start to see these, really highly romanticized tellings of, sometimes it's folklore, sometimes it's an old story, and sometimes it's completely real, sometimes it's completely made up. So we see those. We see the medieval times type movies where you have people in either chainmail or full plate armor. You can see the Templar Knights, and you see they usually have long hair that's pulled back, or sometimes it's blowing in the wind. They'll have the garment that's draped over their armor with the big cross. These are the types of things that we immediately see a lot of times when we're thinking of that type of warrior. And then sometimes we go forward and we look at it today with our military. Whether you're a Marine, soldier, airman, sailor, Coast Guard, it doesn't matter. We see those different areas a lot of times as warriors. And just because somebody has served in the military doesn't necessarily make them a warrior. Not everybody who doesn't serve is not a warrior, because I've actually seen many people that would fit that warrior mold and mentality and mindset and warriorhood in general without ever serving in the military. It's not a mindset, okay? Number one, don't get it confused that a warrior is some type of mental agility that you have to get into to become a warrior. Has nothing to do with mindset. It's not a thought. So just because you can exemplify certain traits of a warrior, it doesn't automatically make you a warrior. No more than an orange can call itself an apple and try to be an apple. It just doesn't happen that way. So we have to really look into what a warrior is. It's not something you can say. And a lot of times we see the military, they all talk a very similar jargon. A lot of times we will talk very similarly, and you know who we are, and you can tell one another by how we speak. A lot of times, thanks again to Hollywood, you're starting to see some of the vernacular that we used to use in the military more or less being commonplace today, which is interesting in itself to see so many times. And it's also not something you can do. Even though warriors are people of action, being a warrior is not something that you necessarily do, because it's so much more. It goes into the psyche of that person. It goes into experiences and what led them to be to where they're at. And that's really what a warrior is. Like I've said this before, is I believe that inherently in the innermost part of everyone's DNA is a warrior that's just waiting to be unleashed. And some people are born with it. They're immediately into that warriorhood mentality and mode, and that's how they operate their life. Some people, it takes a certain situation to ignite that warrior that's within, and they rise to the occasion to become that warrior that they didn't ever know that they were. There's something that unites all warriors. I can't explain it. It's just something that you get, and a lot of times words never need to be spoken. You'll see this with especially Marines. Again, me being a Marine, I know what it is for us, and we can instantly be amongst a new Marine that's fresh out of boot camp, maybe a year at their duty station, and you get somebody who is 80, 90 years old and served a long time ago as a Marine, and there's this certain kindred bond of brotherhood or sisterhood, depending on if they're a lady or a man. And that basically bond is what binds them together, and instantly they will do anything they can for their brother or sister. That's just who we are. Soldiers are the same way. And it's interesting too, because depending on what branch you are, it's like a big family. So you got brothers and sisters, they always argue and fight, but then they always have each other's back. And that's no different than what the military is. There's also something that draws each of us to warriors. Warriors are people of action, like I've mentioned before. And the reason for that is warriors never fit inside of a box. You can never box a warrior in. They can't handle it, and they will never stay there. They'll buck that system to get out of that box. That's just who we are. That's what the nature of a warrior really is, because they can't be part of society. And with that in mind, warriors rarely go with the status quo or whatever the societal norms are. And this a lot of times will put warriors at odds with modern culture and modern society in so many ways. And that's something that not everybody quite understands. And why they don't understand warriors is because we don't think the same that everybody else thinks. We are by nature questioners. We question everything, and we question it with boldness. That's who warriors are. They'll never stop questioning authority. They will never stop questioning orders, and they will never stop questioning who they are. And it's not because they don't want to follow those orders or follow where they're going. It's because they want to question it to ensure that they're following the path that they're supposed to follow so they can achieve all objectives of the mission. That's essentially what a warrior does. Okay, warriors are the ones who will start revolutions. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones creating war or starting a war. Revolutions aren't always on the battlefield. Sometimes revolutions are a way to challenge societal norms. Sometimes it's to start a business. Sometimes it's to start a movement to get people to realize who they really are. And it always takes a warrior to push things to another level. Somebody might start with an idea, but it'll take a warrior that will actually take it to start that revolution. And it's a beautiful thing to see when you see that happen. Warriors are also the same people that will pick up the pieces that are left from a disaster or chaos or whatever it is, and they create something beautiful out of it. We see this time and time again with natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding. We saw this after 9/11. We just see this constantly all the time. We're actually kind of seeing this right now with what's going on in the coronavirus chaos with the first responders doing what they do, because they're picking up the pieces and helping those while they put themselves second and their families second so they can attend to the victims of what's going on. And that's what warriors do. They always think of themselves second. The mission comes first. It's just what it is. Whether you agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. That's just what warriors are. They always put that mission first and the objective second. The warrior spirit is an amazing thing, because the warrior spirit is the purest virtue that has ever been created. And why do I say this? You're going to find out in the warrior spotlight coming up here in just a little while. Because a true warrior transcends lifestyle. Because that warrior way was way before time began. So when I say before time began, so before God said, let there be light, there was a warrior way and a warrior code being imprinted in the DNA of every man, woman, boy, and child, and I firmly believe that. And the reason why I say that is because it's an ancient drive that comes to literally answer the call of integrity, of courage, of honor, commitment, and of loyalty. A warrior is someone who practices integrity. A warrior is full of courage. A warrior is a person of honor. A warrior, for sure, is a person who honors their commitment. And most of all, a warrior is always loyal until the death, or until the end of the mission, or the end, period. So a warrior will see a mission completed one way or another. That, again, is just who a warrior is. You can't separate these basic virtues of a warrior from a warrior. So there might be people that will be courageous. You might see some people that are loyal. You might see some people that practice commitment, and they stand up tall under these. But they're not necessarily a warrior, because they don't exemplify everything about a warrior. And there are many times you'll see a warrior that will practice all of these, and they're a little bit off balanced. And I'm going to talk to you here in a little bit about why that is the case as well. Because warriors tend to be people of passion and people of action, like I've mentioned before. They drive at such a hyper intensity in everything that they do that it's the driving force behind who they are. And it's why so many people never understand who that warrior really is or understands their mentality. That's why so many people get intimidated by them. That's why sometimes, especially for warriors that come out of the military, they get into a job and they find out that their bosses are intimidated by them, and they start trying to give them less important jobs because they're afraid they're going to take their job. And that was never the warrior's intention. It's just because they walk with confidence, they walk with integrity, they walk with courage, honor, commitment, and like I said, they are loyal until the end of the mission. Now, a warrior is created to be this special trifecta of an unstoppable force. It's interwoven into their DNA, because a warrior has to operate on mind, body, and spirit. And if you're not functioning on mind, body, and spirit, if any one of these is out of balance, the warrior is out of balance. And this is why so many times we see our returning veterans dealing with PTS. It's not PTSD, because it is not a disorder. I want to get that straight. It has never been a disorder. It's just post-traumatic stress. And the reason for this is because warriors in the military operate at 300% at all times, because 120% is failing. They also have a mission and a purpose while they serve. And then the military, when they're done, they just say, here's the door, goodbye, good luck to you. You might get a 4 or 8 hour course if you're lucky for transition, but it has nothing to deal with your mind, your body, and your spirit. So until that warrior, when they're back home, gets those three operating at peak performance again, then they start to find that balance. And this is why it's important for us. And this is why I say that a warrior mentality, a warriorhood, a warrior, the DNA of a warrior was an ancient drive that's been there before time began. It's simple to see. When we look in Ephesians 1 and 4, it is my life verse. And you might be thinking, well, here we go. Here's that religious talk. You know what? I don't care. Because you're going to hear it. And if it turns you off, reluctantly, I will say there's other shows out there that you can watch. But this is the foundation, and this is what I find important to be part of that spirit, that mind, and that body, of bringing those all in alignment. Because this promise in Ephesians 1 and 4 is how we know who we are. Because no one is here by accident. No one was a mistake. If you are alive, God birthed breath into your lungs because of this verse. And it says, for he chose us in him. Okay? God chose each of us in him before the foundation of the world, that we would be holy and without blame before him in love. Doesn't mean to be perfect. To be holy is because we are living with him, and that's the difference. But at the same time, when you look at before God said, let there be light, and the Big Bang happened, because when God spoke, everything had to, like that, come into alignment and do action, because that's who God is. So when he said, let there be light, he started a chain reaction that caused a bang. I believe it, and that's what they talk about when they talk about the Big Bang. But God chose you, whoever you are watching right now, he chose you before the foundation of the world. You have a mission. You have a purpose. Just like I have a mission and I have a purpose. When we get into alignment and find that mission and that purpose, everything begins to make sense. And that's the promise that I have for you today. The Warrior Spotlight. This Warrior Spotlight is amazing. And I want you to see, because this is the first example, in my opinion, of what one person who exhibited every basic trait and characteristic of who a warrior is. And that is none other than Jesus Christ himself. And the reason I'm going to tell you that, is Jesus was God. So you've got the trifecta there as well. So you've got the Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. God the Son, Jesus, separated himself out. So God was the beginning and the end. So he is from the beginning and he is at the end. It is at one junction that happens. And you ask me, why do I say that? Here's something I want you to understand. Is everything that you're going through, everything that I'm going through, everything that's going on in society right now, God has already seen, and he's already seen the end. Just like our old school train tracks that run on electricity, and I'm not talking about batteries, but I'm talking about you plug it into the wall, runs on good old-fashioned electricity. These trains cannot get going until you connect that last piece of that track together to complete that circuit. The beginning and the end. That's who God is. So he cares everything about you. He cares everything about me. So with that in mind, when we look at Jesus being the ultimate warrior, is because he was the beginning and the end. He was timeless. But for 33 years, he pulled himself into our time. Subject to our time. Subject to our thoughts, our actions, everything that we are to be the perfect sacrifice for us. But for the first 30 years of his life, you see some areas mentioned in the Bible, but it wasn't until those last 3 years that his whole purpose really took off. And you can also say, I don't believe in Jesus. Well, that's fine, but he still believes in you. He still believes in me. But there was a mathematician that did the basically the whatever the calculations are, right, to figure out who this Jesus was, and if it was possible for someone to fulfill all 54 prophecies from the Old Testament. And what they found out is just to fulfill 8 of those prophecies from the Old Testament, it's the equivalent of taking, I think it was quarters, stacking them about 2 feet high on the whole face of Texas, taking one and putting an X on it and mixing them all up and telling someone to go in and find the one with the X. It's astronomical, and that was just 8, so imagine 54. That's how you know that Jesus was for real. Now, and then not to mention all of the eyewitness accounts. Lee Strobel has talked about this. There was another author, and I'm drawing a blank on his name. He talked about that as well, how when you look at all of this information about eyewitness accounts and all of that, you start to line up and you start to see how they proved each other right. So those contradictions in the scriptures that people talk about, what they've talked about and how they show from an investigator standpoint that all basically fits together like a puzzle, shows that there are no contradictions. So back to Jesus. So he went through last 3 years, he's preaching, he's healing the sick, he's raising the dead, he's doing all this cool stuff. But it really wasn't his full purpose. That was part of his purpose, but his full purpose was his death and resurrection. So at the very end of all of this, before he was arrested, he goes into the garden to pray. He asked the Father, if there's any way that I can get away from this, please let it pass. But if it's your will, I'm going to do what I need to do. Then we see this dialogue happening between Jesus and the devil saying, well, if you throw yourself off this cliff, you rise up, I'll put you on the right side of me, and all of this nonsense basically. Jesus shot him down every single time. The importance of that is because of what had to be fulfilled with the crucifixion. So he goes, gets arrested, they take him under court, and the weird thing is there was no law that he broke, nothing that they could actually do other than the fact that sometimes he may have healed somebody on the Sabbath day. So they just wanted to get rid of him because he threatened their way of life. And this was the Pharisees, the religious leaders of that day. So they go before Pilate and before the Romans, and he's basically put on trial. So with all of this said and done, even the Roman governor Pilate said, I wash my hands of this. His blood is on your hands. So he basically turned him over to be crucified. Now there was 3 people that were supposed to be crucified. So rather than convict somebody who was a criminal, they put the innocent person on. The lamb, like the Old Testament used to sacrifice. You had to have someone innocent to stand in the place for our sins. And that's what happened. So they set a thief free so they could crucify Jesus. And during this time, you see that he was beaten, he was tortured, and all of that. And the weird thing about that is, or not really weird, but the amazing thing about that is you see him coming to the end of the time on the cross. And because he was beaten, because he was tortured like he was, the crucifixion happened a lot faster than it normally would have. Because there's a certain medical procedure, but medically, when somebody is crucified, it's a horrific death. And there was a doctor that went through, and it was an amazing article that I read about this. So at first they start, and they're trying to hold themselves up with their legs. and they're stretched out so they can kind of sit up a little bit, and they're doing fine and everything else. But then they start losing strength in their legs. And as they start losing strength in their legs, their body starts to fall down. And you can see, but their arms are still stretched out. So what happens is they begin to suffocate in their lungs, doing that because they can't stand up under that pressure anymore. And then their lungs begin to fill with fluid, and then of course they ultimately drown. But then they all, or at least I think that's what it is, and then they end up dying from all of that disaster. So there was an important thing when the Roman soldier punctured Jesus in the side with a spear. Blood and water came out to show you that he was dead. But the most important thing that I really want you guys to understand, there was two people on each side of him, or one on each side of him. One of them mocked Jesus the entire time. The other one said, "Why do you mock him? Can't you see that this is the Lord?" And Jesus, in his anguish, forgave that person of their sin. Just like that. That's a compassion that many warriors also exhibit. They exhibit compassion. And I really want you to understand that as well. So don't get a warrior's compassion mixed up and think that you can walk all over them, because that's not going to happen either. We're not Jesus. So just so you know that. But when we look at that whole death, finally, at one point, God the Father had to turn his back on Jesus, because all of the sins, past, present, and future, all the sins I ever committed, all the sins that you ever committed, and so on and so forth, was thrown onto Jesus. God couldn't see that sin, so he turned his back, and Jesus said, "Why have you forsaken me?" Wasn't that he forsake Jesus, but he forsake of the fact that he had to turn his back because he couldn't see that sin. Then, at the same time, while he was being tortured and crucified, Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Because there were people down there mocking Jesus left and right. And then at that point, when he said, "It is finished," the skies opened up and roaring sounds from heaven came down, and people were scared and they took off. And as a result of that is the veil in the tabernacle was torn, which also fulfilled a purpose, and a prophecy in the Old Testament. And then 3 days later, we know the story. He was risen and resurrected from the dead. Now, I know you think that that's all fairy tales and all of that. The question is, are you going to believe? Are you going to look at that and say, you know what, that is absolutely the truth? Because the characteristics that Jesus operated in was integrity, was honesty, was courage, was commitment, was honor to his Father in heaven, and loyalty to his Father and to every one of us. He had loyalty for us before we had loyalty to him. And then most importantly, he showed that compassion by being that sacrifice for our sins. That's why Jesus, in my opinion, is the ultimate warrior. No questions about it. And that's why I say you don't have to be a person of battle, a person of combat to be a warrior. A warrior mentality, a warriorhood in general, is somebody who rises up to do the impossible and to make that mission happen. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Warrior Up Show. Until next time, don't forget, Warrior Up.
This episode of the Warrior Up Show has been brought to you by the Warrior Up book, available on Westbow Press, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and more. Buy a book, give a book, and sponsor books for the #Books4Heroes campaign. Check out warriorupbook.com to learn more about sponsoring books for our veterans.